So thank you once again for joining us. Before we begin, I would like to begin respectfully by acknowledging I'm currently speaking to you from the traditional and ancestral land of the Anishinaabe. This land is the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples, and we recognize the important contribution that Métis, Inuit, and other indigenous peoples have made in both shaping and strengthening this community as in particular, and the province and the country as a whole. The land has been inhabited by indigenous peoples from the beginning, and we are grateful for this opportunity to live and meet here, and thank all generations of people who have been custodians of this land for thousands of years. We also acknowledge and deeply appreciate and respect the historic connection to the land, unique and sacred relationship that indigenous peoples have had with the land, the water, and all living creatures, and their role in protecting these lands since the beginning. And what a challenge it has been. Our acknowledgement and recognition of this connection must also clearly and overtly be coupled with our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of reconciliation real in our communities. There is no reconciliation without truth. In the spirit of collaboration and reconciliation, the CLC is committed to confronting historical and ongoing colonialism and violence against Indigenous communities, and joining in solidarity and struggle against the systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous people of their lands and denied their rights to self-determination. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize the loss of Rebecca Comtois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Miran, and a fourth unidentified woman, but who has been given the name of Buffalo Woman by community members, 4 Indigenous women whose lives were cut short in Winnipeg. As both individuals and union members, it is absolutely imperative we continue to stand alongside Indigenous communities and family members who have been sounding the alarm on this devastating emergency for many years, as thousands of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people have gone missing or murdered across the country. With heavy hearts, we mourn the lives lost to and heavily impacted by colonial and systemic violence. We'll speak about this shortly, which has been so widely experienced by Indigenous communities across these lands, and will continue to call for action and justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people and their families and community members. We urge you to take action in your unions, in your workplaces, and in your communities to fight for justice for Indigenous communities, and you can visit CLC's Indigenous Justice Resource Center for some resources and action items to do precisely this. My friends, we found ourselves in deeply unsettling and difficult times, fighting numerous battles on numerous fronts. The COVID-19 pandemic has deepened long-standing systemic inequities and unleashed a massive tidal wave of xenophobia, hate, racism, scapegoating, and fear-mongering. I do not need reference and if what has been going on precisely. If you have been paying any kind of attention, it is all around us. While recent data has shown an increase in hate in Canada, Labor's struggle against the scourge of racism is not new. Union activists have fought for decades to confront racism in our unions, our workplaces, and society. So precisely 25 years ago, a quarter century, CLC's National Anti-Racism Task Force produced an eye-opening report titled Challenging Racism, Going Beyond Recommendations. This challenging report included the concerns, the perspectives, and recommendations of labor and community activists from across Canada regarding the elimination of racism in our workplaces, our unions, and communities. So what lessons can we learn and apply today for the hard-fought struggles of those activists, and how can history help guide us through the major challenges we're facing today? How do we continue to build on the strong legacy of anti-racist action left by Black, Indigenous, and racialized union activists who have taken up this fight over several decades now? These are just some of the questions we will explore today with our panelists as we reflect on the past, and it's my pleasure now to welcome our guests. And we have a very, very exciting panel for you today. So I will start with our two guests of honor. First and foremost, Senator Hassan Yussuff. The Honorable Senator Hassan Yussuff has played an active and integral part in Canada's labor movement for many years. After emigrating from Guyana, he first became involved with labor in 1988, just yesterday, when he joined the Canadian Auto Workers Union. In 1999, he was elected as the Executive Vice President of the CLC. He then served as the Secretary-Treasurer before becoming the first person of color to be elected as the organization's president in 2014. Among the multitude of other significant positions he held, he was also notably the president of the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas from 2012 to 2021. In June 2021, he was appointed to the Senate of Canada by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and as a senator, he remains committed to workers' issues and is a member of the Independent Senators Group. Our next guest of honor is Dr. Lynn Jones, a community and labor activist from an African Nova Scotian community in Truro, Nova Scotia, affectionately known as the Marsh. She moved to Halifax to pursue higher academic goals, and after many years employed in the community and the federal public service, she retired from formal employment endeavors. But she is an active volunteer in urban and rural projects. There is no retirement. From inception to present day, she has been in the vanguard of the struggle against anti-Black racism and the struggle to obtain human rights for marginalized communities. She became the first Black person to be elected as a vice president of the CLC. She presently chairs the first board of directors of the Down the Marsh Community Land Trust in Truro, and which facilitates the obtaining of land to be owned in perpetuity by the Black community to erect affordable housing for members of the community. Her political interests lie in the attainment of reparations for African people worldwide. She has been awarded honorary doctorate degrees by both Acadia and Mount St. Vincent universities, which have recognized her extensive contributions to social justice in Canada and abroad. So to both Dr. Yussuff and to Dr. Lynn Jones, we say welcome. Thank you so much. What a journey it has been for both of you since you were vice presidents of equity for the CLC. Our next guest, Gloria Lipin, is a proud Métis woman with 2 children and 5 grandchildren. She has been a CUPE member for 20 years, an activist her entire life. Her mother was a chief shop steward, and Gloria grew up on the strike lines. She has worked full-time with CUPE Local 3550 as chief shop steward since 2006. Gloria has worked on many committees, issues, and campaigns such as Equal Opportunity Committee, the work to create an Alberta Aboriginal Council, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, clean potable water for First Nations reserves, and the overrepresentation of Indigenous community members in the child welfare and justice systems. She's received the CUPE Alberta Equality Award and the Aboriginal Role Models of Alberta Volunteer Award for her work on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Gloria was elected to the CUPE National Executive Board as the Diversity Vice President, representing Indigenous workers in 2015 and 2017, providing support to the executive on Indigenous issues across Canada. In 2021, Gloria was elected as CLC's Vice President, representing Indigenous workers. Ainsworth Spence, our next guest, is a dynamic trade unionist who is currently serving his 3rd term as CLC's vice president representing workers of color. He is passionate, and I can say he is very passionate about defending workers' rights and the promotion of fairness and equity. Ainsworth is a strong advocate for making the labor movement more inclusive and diverse. His vision is to see more workers of color and those from marginalized and disenfranchised communities attain more leadership roles. And you are the model for that, my friend. Ainsworth is a social justice capacity builder at SEIU Healthcare, one of Canada's largest healthcare unions. In this role, he is responsible for designing programs and campaigns that advance social justice for all equity-seeking groups. A focus of his work is on racial and economic justice, which includes strategies to close the racial wealth gap. Our next guest, Gail Nye, has been a labor advocate and community activist for over 35 years. A former BCGEU officer and staff representative, she served as education officer and equity and human rights officer. Her work included development and delivery of anti-racism and harassment prevention education for union leadership, activists, and community. Gail was an organizer and facilitator for the BC Federation of Labor's Summer Institute for Union Women. Proud to be counted as a founding member of the Asian Canadian Labour Alliance in BC, Gail enthusiastically supports and encourages youth and BIPOC activists, Black, Indigenous, and persons of color activists. From 2009 to 2019, she was a board member with Antidote, Multiracial and Indigenous Girls and Women's Network. Since her retirement as labor coordinated with United Way Greater Victoria in 2019, Gail has been volunteering with the Chinese Community Services Center and completed a Victoria Chinatown Histories project called Telling Our Stories, Sharing Our Lives. In 2023, she will be facilitating the CCSC's Community Workshop Series in response to anti-Asian racism and discrimination. And finally, our last guest panelist is Natalie Vengal, is a food, justice, and labor rights activist who works as a national representative at UFCW Canada. She also served as the chair of the National Council Young Workers Committee, and after obtaining her degree in Human Rights and Equity Studies, Natalie founded the first youth-led food bank in the city of Toronto in 2016. The food bank serves hundreds of young families from equity-seeking groups and continues to operate today. In her spare time, Natalie works diligently as a board member of Food Secure Canada and the North York Harvest Food Bank to address food insecurity and food policy at the local and national levels. And holy mackerel, I can say welcome, panelists. Thank you all for being here with us today. And let's get right into it. So we do have questions, and of course, I have the prerogative as the moderator of this session to open the questions. And so I'd like to begin, of course, with Hassan and Lynn, who I call Hassan and Lynn. You each have spent many years working to combat racism and advance the interests of Indigenous, Black, and racialized workers. Much work that you have done over the decades. And part of that work has included serving as members of CLC's National Anti-Racism Task Force, which led to the very report that we are celebrating today. Take us back to the mid-late 1990s when you were undertaking this work. What were some of the issues and difficulties workers were facing that the task force was trying to respond to at the time? So I'm going to go to Lynn first, and then I will go to Hassan. Go ahead, Lynn.
Well,
what was it like back then?
Thank you so much. I feel like we could stop after those wonderful introductions, and I feel so humbled to be part of this this great panel. So, Brother Larry, let me first of all say too, I am so pleased and overjoyed that the CLC is embarking upon this panel, because for me the question was, wow, I'm old. They're making me old. 25 years ago that we did this work, and they're still pulling it, excuse me, out of the hat. But to get to your question, because like I said, it's a big panel. I can still remember like it was yesterday that of course myself, brother Hassan, and I would be remiss if I didn't name two other key people as part of the task force, which was Sister Ethel LaValle and brother David Onyello. We were in some difficult times and challenging times. Let's just say that workers of color, and then it was included with Indigenous and Aboriginal people, were all part. I don't know what it is now. We're all part of that terminology of workers of color, and there was fabulous work being done in individual unions and in the community, but we weren't getting over the hurdles of really getting our concerns front line, which is how so it wasn't just us, it was the whole trade union movement of these workers of color who were challenging the labor movement at that time, because our work really was often not coordinated. Everybody was in their own little pockets doing all their great things alone, but we weren't making much headway, which is how we ended up with the task force saying, let's all get together. We have so much in common as compared to what we have in terms of differences, and let us go after this together. I can say from that time that also what I really noticed was before that there was often disputes between the different groups, a lot of disputes. Everybody's vying for that crab in the apple. Everybody's aware of that kind of thing. But what the task force did was allow us to come together, get everything on paper and in this report, and then we didn't have to backtrack all the time on saying, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, because now it was all in the report and we were able to work better together because we knew we had taken note. Up to that point in time, many of our issues, there was a lot of erasure of our issues and our concerns, and now at least it was on paper. I think you got to remember the times it was post the Rosalia Bella report on equity, and we were challenged by the government having their own interpretation of that report, whereas the workers of color had a different interpretation of how things would unfold. So the task force helps to put that forward, and we were able to make solid the role of our communities. I would say to this point in time, people didn't understand. We couldn't separate trade union issues from community issues. It was part and parcel of who we are. I'll stop there because I could go on forever and ever and ever. And I'll turn it over. Maybe we'll get to come back because I have like this humongous list of concerns related to your question, but I'll turn
I'm
over.
Sure you do. I'm sure you do. But Hassan, my friend, I know that you will not take two or three different roads to get right to the nitty gritty and tell us what your view of what was it like when you were doing this work back when in the 90s, and what was your experience and what would you like to enlighten us on?
Well, listen, it's great to see everybody, and more importantly, great to see Lynn. Her enthusiasm for life never seems to amaze me. And despite all she has gone through and the contribution she's made, it's truly amazing to watch her. My reflection, I think, on the task force work, a little bit maybe different. Not to take away from anything that Lynn has said, but this was, as you know, we were elected in 1992. And in 1994 was the second term, actually, that the resolution was in the convention that got passed, and subsequently to that, the task force was established. I think a large objective that we were trying to get is for the movement to acknowledge that racism was not something they could pretend that didn't exist in our movement. And equally, that when you talk to people, you would hear different anecdotes and stories about the challenges. But we felt with the task force, we were able to travel the country. We will meet with activists in their own community and hopefully discover what is it that they would like us to do in the process. My reflection, is probably the hardest thing I ever done in my life. It was the most painful thing I've ever done, because the stories that activists told you about their experience in their own union was not easy to deal with. And these were stories about how fellow worker treated them, how their union treated them, and more importantly, the lack of support they did not receive for what they were going through. So there was a lot of pain in the discussion. I think, as I remember, and Lynn may correct me, I think we visited some 30-something communities across the country that we went to, places that the labor movement was never heard or seen from, meaning the CLC. It was the first time the CLC, I think, set up a process to go and talk about an issue in which the CLC leadership at the time, meaning it wasn't one of the full-time officers that led this task force. It was myself and Lynn at times there. Ethel was involved, but essentially it was the two of us and David traveling the country, going to talk to activists, and that was unique in itself. And the last point I would make, what we wanted to, which is not where we started out, we wanted to have a report, as Liz was saying, that would actually document people's experience about in their union, in their community, and it was both, because when we had these gatherings in wherever we were going, both community and the labor movement participated. But what was interesting is, of course, there was no separation in terms of the issues that was discussed, but we wanted to document that actually we could show to the leadership to say, these voices in this task force are your members talking. These are not some imaginary group of people. These are your members. And what you could do is to learn from that experience as to how you can address the concerns that they had. And the last point I would make is that while people after tried to deny the foundation of the task force report, what was easy to do was to remind them that was their members. These were not other people talking. These were their members talking. And whether they liked it or not, it was the truth. Now, at the end of the day, it took a long time. I think we spent an entire year plus traveling and putting together the report. And the subsequent thing we did do was the first time I could remember something like this happen. When the report was finished, we did go back to the communities across the country to discuss the recommendations with activists. And I think that, to me, was probably the most exciting things, because we're saying, now, here's your report. These are the recommendations. How do you think you can go about in your own organization trying to bring about some of these changes that will help you make your union better, maybe help strengthen your relationship with the community and the trade union movement, but equally also will help empower you as an individual who are fighting this individual on sometimes individual battle, but also sometimes collective battle within our movement. I think in retrospective, I can simply say a lot of changes came about, but we still got a long way to go. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Hassan. And I think that anyone who has read the report, and I believe the report has been made available, the link should be in the chat. Anyone who has read the report can still understand that even today, for any organization, it provides the basis on which to attack these issues and these challenges within your respective organizations. And the challenges have been many and remain many to this day. So I'd like to open up the discussion to our other panelists, Gloria and Gail, as well as Ainsworth and Natalie. So there have been some victories over the past 25 years. There are many union activists today who are still, including yourselves, who are very dedicated to doing this work. But what are the challenges and the issues that are driving your work, respectively, to dismantle the racism, and the oppression, and the effects of colonization that we union activists are experiencing today? So I'll start. I'll just go Gloria, Gail, Ainsworth, and Natalie. So go ahead, Gloria.
Thanks, Larry. I mean, for me, I think, what drives me is still the injustices for people and basic human rights. We need safety and security as individuals, as Indigenous people. I continue to fight for my sisters, for murder, missing Indigenous women and girls, and Two-Spirited. You know, in my community, there's 15 murdered and missing Indigenous women in a little northeastern British Columbia community. You know, there's large-scale resource extraction to our lands, which also affect murdered and missing Indigenous women. You know, we are overrepresented in so many ways in justice and child welfare systems. And, you know, I mean, my drive is that I want a better world for all of us, all my relations. So, you know, that's why I keep doing this work, is for my communities and for my fellow workers.
Thank you, Gloria. Gail.
Thank you. Well, I have to agree. I mean, in terms of looking around now, and in comparison to 25 years ago or before, that not very much has changed. And what's been very alarming is the uprising of hate and the spiral into violence and incivility. So, you know, recurring patterns can't be ignored. We learn a lot as we move on through, as we find allies and so on. But it very important from the perspective of community now, considering labor and the way that we organized, the way that we took that time, or that, you know, the Congress took the time to go and to ask in all of the regions of the country, and to hear those very difficult stories, to then formulate and put it into something as valuable, touching on those areas of systems and structures and the ideas or ideologies that will drive others down. I think that it makes a big difference to personal experience of our memberships, but also into community and those ways that we connect. So I'll stop there to build upon it in the next question, but it really, this is a time that calls to us, and that we must continue to do that work and build upon it from the years past, and all of those who've led us and that we've taken part with along the way. Thanks.
Thank you, Gail. Ainsworth, what do you think about the work that is ongoing now?
Thank you, Larry. I firstly want to thank Senator Yussuff and Dr. Lynn Jones for their work on the CLC National Anti-Racism Task Force. Both of you, along with the task force, did some really amazing work, so thank you for that. I think unions over the years have always led by example, and the work of the task force and the recommendation speaks volumes. There still exists significant challenges, and we must continue to push as unions. There are notable changes, however, that we must acknowledge and embrace. Over the last 10 years, I would say, we've had several leaders of color ascending to some of the top leadership positions within their unions and across the entire Canadian labor movement, including several of our Black sisters. If I may send a shout out to some of them, we've got Jan Simpson, Karen Brown, Yolanda McLean, Andrea Babington, Marie Clark Walker, Lily Chang, and of course, can't leave the brothers out. We've got Tyler Downing, Jason McLean, Chris Campbell, Larry Russo, and of course our own Senator, Yussuff. I think the simplicity of racism back then has changed in that it was more forthright. There weren't many means or tools available as we have today to shine a light on the discrimination and racism. The more complex type of racism, however, that we had 25 years ago, despite the many gains, I think this still is with us. The racism that happens just under the surface, under the guise of systems and structures, policies and historical practices, that isn't quite obvious, even to the folks and that are committed to eliminating racism in the workplaces. These discriminatory practices continue to leave the historically disenfranchised excluded from promotions in the unions. Another challenge is checking the equity box, which is obviously still happening today, but it's really not the thing anymore. Most unions have gone beyond checkbox basics, but they are yet to go all the way. It's like doing the 100-meter dash and pulling up at the 80-meter mark. Unfortunately, this is not a productive practice. Unions must sprint all the way in order to get changes. Some unions aren't the Usain Bolt, if I may use this analogy, of doing equity work. Therefore, pulling up at 80-meter might just end in disaster. And we know we have a lot of tools in the labor movement, specifically the Toronto York Region Labor Council, of what's called, let's see here, a leader's guide to strengthen unions moving beyond diversity towards inclusion and equity. This is an amazing resource that I've actually taken advantage of. Thank you, Larry. Back to you.
Thank you, Ainsworth. Natalie, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, folks. It is disappointing that today in Canada, the unemployment rate between racialized and non-racialized workers continues to be quite high. And this widened during the pandemic. For example, statistically, in January 2021, the unemployment rate among Black Canadians was about 70% higher than that among non-visible minority Canadians. Also, I think that we must take into consideration that BIPOC workers in Canada work in some of the most precarious industries, such as hospitality, retail, culture, and recreation, and are also precariously employed, which typically means poorly paid, part-time or temporary work, insecure work, and often without benefits, and including no access to employer-funded sick leave. Research evidence also tells us precarious workers are less likely to receive adequate health, safety, and job-specific training, along with inequitable access to healthcare. So folks, I think we're still in a crisis that we as a labor movement have to continue to fight to address. And these are definitely the drives to continue to fight racism systemically at the workplace and our communities.
So thanks, Natalie, for raising the points that you raised particularly, because that really segues into my next question, and that is, how do we build solidarity within our movement, and especially amongst our Black, Indigenous, and workers of color? How do we work together? Because in order to be effective in fighting racism in all its forms, including systemic and structural, we need that solidarity across racial lines, across all the intersectionalities that we can find within. So how can unions and those doing this work, build better solidarity? And I'm going to start with you, Natalie. I'm going to go in reverse order since you kind of, really put it out there. So I'll start with Natalie, and then I'll go backwards. I'll go back to Ainsworth, and then Gail, and then to Gloria. Go ahead.
Thank you, Larry. Sometimes when I have the opportunity to speak to workers all across Canada about the issues that drive them to join a union or to remain union activists and being advocates at the workplace, I like to start the conversation every time I have a point. What's going on at the workplace? What is the demographic of your workplace? Are BIPOC workers getting less shift? Are they getting paid less? Are they agency workers? So sometimes it's our duty as trade unionists to bring forward anti-racism language when we're talking to workers, so we can know and tackle the issue from the moment we speak to workers until we address it in collective bargaining, and we establish language in collective bargaining to ensure there's protections and respect at the workplace. So I like to begin with having those conversations from the get-go with all workers at a workplace. Another way that I find very useful is to connect with workers at all times and provide them with tools on, for example, how to address microaggressions at the workplace. Connecting with workers takes many forms. We know it. It could be in person when we're visiting a unit. It could be during a training. It could be through WhatsApp, Instagram. You know, there's so many ways to connect. And we can always send a quick test. Hey, have you experienced this at the workplace? Here's our 5 ways to address microaggressions, or how to identify microaggressions at the workplace. Also, providing this information about the different experiences that workers and BIPOC workers in Canada experience at the workplace, in their communities, in the system. I think that's also a very good way of building that solidarity among workers.
Well, thank you, Natalie. So Ainsworth, I go to you as Vice President of Workers of Color. What are you seeing as the challenges, for building solidarity, and especially when you mentioned it in your initial remarks, but the unions themselves, the affiliates themselves, how do you get that to click? How do you get folks to work together?
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to approach this from an organizing lens. We know multiculturalism is something we are proud of, and it's one of our biggest strengths as in the Canadian workforce, rather. Multiculturalism helps trade union extend our reach to workers and communities we typically wouldn't have access to. How we build solidarity amongst workers of different cultures is to embrace and accept our cultural differences. This is absolutely key. Having patience and understanding is important. Understanding that workers from the same groups are going to naturally gravitate towards each other. This is okay. It's just a means of finding ways of actually bringing them into the fold. I was going to give an example. I skipped that because we don't have much time. I think another example would be creating and promoting spaces that builds bridges and bring people together. Potlucks. We know our Caribbean folks, particularly Jamaicans, we love our potlucks. That's a nice way to build bridges. We can do lunch and learn through a speaker series around days of observance and awareness on a monthly or quarterly basis. And lastly, team building exercises. This is where we use our differences as our strength, naming and identifying what the barriers are, and working to build bridges, sharing our cultural differences through open discussion and activities that are actually enjoyable and fun. Nothing too intense, because it's the purpose of it is to be light and to actually engage and enjoy each other's space. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Ainsworth, and I'm going to come back to that. But Gloria, what do you think about solidarity? What are you seeing that some of the challenges there are?
Well, I think Ainsworth and I are twins there. We have a lot of the same things that we believe in. I think that we have to educate ourselves about each other and be okay with the differences, because we're all different, and that makes this beautiful world. I mean, I think we need to listen to the voices of other people and stand up with them, beside them, not in front of them. I've had many times in my life where somebody will speak for me, instead of making the space, creating a space for me to speak my own truth. I think we should use some shared experiences, and I just think about Indigenous people. Boy, if we can't get behind water, we're in a bad way, because every Canadian needs water. It doesn't matter your stripes, it doesn't matter your political affiliations, it does not matter, and this is an issue for Indigenous people, is clean, potable water. And so I think we should use like experiences so that we can work together collectively to continue the work of anti-oppression and anti-racism. You know what? When Black Canadians are getting shot in the streets, we should be there as Indigenous Canadians. When Indigenous women their grave sites are graves in a garbage dump, we should be all outraged about that. And so I think that, you know, there's some like things that we just can work on and really just listen to each other.
Speaking of water, one of the things that strikes anyone who reads the report is that the report did identify environmental racism as a huge issue 25 years ago. This was long before Ingrid Waldron even, probably she was still just in elementary school back then. So this is the importance of the report. The issues, the report brought out all the issues. And one of the things that I want to get back to, and I'm sorry to push you on this, Natalie, although I see that, because I am going to say something, because when we talk about environmental issues, and we talk about the solidarity and reaching out, we tend to forget about our young workers. Either that, or if we forget about them, that's one problem, but also we tend to set up barriers to keep them from coming into the movement and really, feeling that they're part of it. Although I'm getting the feeling that a lot of young folks today are just tearing down those barriers and saying, you know what, and that's really the good news. So just very quickly, Natalie, what do you think about that, especially our young workers?
Young workers, and I think that we're going to get to that again, but I think that young workers today want to relate to other generations of workers, that the issues affecting them are significantly different. The reality of work, the economy, it's different. But what I do see is so much solidarity and understanding that each of them experience work differently from a racial perspective. There is a lot of understanding and openness, and are ready to stand, and young workers are ready to stand with each other when any sort of injustice of any kind is happening to any of their coworkers. I'm speaking on behalf of organized workers as well as not organized workers who have reached out and said, "Hey, I want to organize because my coworkers are not being treated fairly at the workplace, or my Latino worker, my Latino coworker, isn't getting enough hours versus other people who have privilege." Or so I do see that there is a lot more awareness and ready to fight sort of vibe, and that gives me a lot of hope. But that's something that we can also support. We have to be able to provide them with all the resources and all the support they need so they can continue the fight.
So Natalie, I'm just loving your energy and your passion right now, and how you're really showing us. You very gave us a great illustration of what's out there right now and what I'm seeing increasingly. So from going from our younger folks to our more experienced folks, not to use that term that we more experienced folks do not like. I'm going to go to Hassan, and I'm going to go to Lynn, because the task force did discuss all these issues that we are facing today. 25 years later, we're seeing the rise in hate, xenophobia, the rise in fascism, the rise in economic and social inequities. The context is different, but the issues are there. And in fact, people are taking advantage of these inequities to advance. It's just expanding more and more. So what are some of the things that came out of the task force that our activists, and especially our younger activists today, can use to tackle these pressing problems within their unions and workplaces? And Hassan, I'm going to go to you. What is it that came out of the task force and the report that we can sell to young folks today to say, you know what? This has been with us for a very long time, but here's some advice. Here's some stuff that you can use to fight on this. So what do you think, Hassan?
Well, I'll start with again the fact that people belong to unions. Unions is probably the greatest vehicle for social justice in our society. It has resources, has structure, and it has the opportunity to bring people together when it chose to do so, to take on, a broader social political issues, both within our movement but outside in our movement. I've always said that workers don't live in a bubble. They live in the society in which, they reside. And more importantly, if there are issues in their community, those issues permeate into their workplace and vice versa. So we should never think that somehow this exists in the community and doesn't exist in the workplace. I think the bigger challenge we face, which is an ongoing challenge, is not a new one. Inequality and respect has always defied our movement and will continue to defy our movement, because we need to remind ourselves constantly as leaders, but also as activists, this is the foundation what our movement was founded on. We need to treat each other equally, but also we need to respect each other. And the challenge is, no matter where you come from, whether you're a gay, lesbian, bisexual person, whether you're a Muslim person, whether you're a Black person, whether you're an Indigenous person, sometimes we're not very kind to each other. Somebody said, respect me, but I can go and do the other thing over there. I used to teach a program in my own union, and I used to tell people when they come to the program, and a little bit crude, I said, you spend your whole life learning a lot of shit. I'm going to try to get as much out of that out of your head before we finish this program in 2 weeks, to unlearn some of the things that you've learned about how we behave with each other. And that's a real challenge, to get people to accept that the things that they have learned, whether it's in school, whether it's with friends, whether it's in even in a church, how we treat each other is not acceptable anymore. We have to start to change that. And that's really hard, by the way, because you cannot make change without creating some tension. There'll always be tension if you want to make change. And quite often, the people who are doing things we don't agree with, simply hugging them is not going to make them stop doing it. You have to confront them to get them to change their behavior and their attitude. And that requires a lot of work. I think the task force speaks to some of that to a large extent. It shows us different ways in how we can tackle this problem, but also it's a reminder that we're stronger when we're united as a group, as workers. We're stronger when we're united as a labor movement. And fundamentally, this has always been the challenge that we faced. The one thing that I think is critical to remind ourselves of the task force had looked at things the way they were back 25 years ago. And you look at what some union leadership decided to do to confront that reality in their own union. And it was just amazing what happened. But nothing is stagnant. If you're not continued to push for change, you're going to go back to the way things were very quickly. Because it's not, as I always says, you don't need to do anything to change the status quo. What you need is efforts to continue to move away from it and to improve it constantly. And each generation of workers who come have to take their own place, how they're going to continue that fight and that struggle. But equally with leadership is to give support to the work, to put resources to the work, and to dedicate staff to do that work, to help those activists who are trying to make a difference in their union. And I think that's a large part of it. Canada was founded on some very, fundamental contradictions for our labor movement. It wasn't founded on equality. It's founded from people coming from another part of the world to tell us that this is a country they discovered. Aboriginal people didn't need you to tell them they were getting discovered. They were here. And now, of course, generation later, 150 something years later, we're trying to understand how we could do better in our relation with First Nation people and Aboriginal people in this country, but also how we can do better, how we treat each other. And I think the labor movement don't have two luxuries. One, it doesn't have the luxury of thinking things are going to go back the way they were, because it's continued to change. As I speak to you today, the diversity of our movement in our country has never been greater in my lifetime. So what does that mean for a movement if we don't learn from it? And secondly, of course, the reality, just because we did things a certain way doesn't mean we have to keep doing. The pandemic has taught us one thing, that we didn't all need to meet in a union hall to talk to each other. So if we can communicate to mass amount of people without ever seeing them or meeting with them, why can't we learn to use those tools in a different way as how we bring our movement together? Activists can find common ground. But I think, again, at the time when we did the task force, we were trying to, of course, look to the future. and understand what can be the benefit from the things we were learning then that will help our movement become that much stronger. The reason for doing the task force was not to weaken the labor movement, was to strengthen the labor movement. And I think for those who took the report and tried to figure out how to implement it in our union, I think those objectives have long been met in some unions. Of course, the work still continues as it is in the CLC. And I think we're forever grateful. I'll leave you one story because if I don't get another moment. When the task force was finished, Lynn remembers this very well. I remember having dinner with Bob White one night to tell him that there are things in the task force he's not going to like, and there are things that many of the leadership are not going to want to acknowledge. And I said, you need to learn two things. One, this was our members, activists, talking about their experience in our union. And as horrible as it is, we cannot deny it. We need to acknowledge it. I said, the second thing you could do if you truly want to give some meaning to this is to release this report publicly. Not keep it private as an internal effort on behalf of us. And it says, call a press conference and give it to the media. And they're going to ask you a question. Why would anybody in their right mind take a report that says all these things and then reports it to the public? And I said, the only response I can help you in that question is to tell them, if we can do this, anybody can in this country. And that would be the best thing we could do to help the cause of fighting racism in our society. By the way, he did call a press conference publicly and release the task force report. And that same question came up. And he gave the same answer I'm giving you to here today. But I think what it did is speak to the hopefulness of how we can see something as horrible as it is and the damage it's created to lives of activists and workers in our movement to turn it into something positive. We will never undo the damage that racism has continued to do in our lives. But we can certainly look to the opportunity when we have them to make positive change to make this world a better place. I'm hoping my young daughter, as she grows up, her world will be a little bit better than what our dad experienced when he was a young activist.
That's the least we can ask for. Thank you for sharing that, Hassan. That's the first time I've heard that story, and it's I'm hoping that it's going to provide some illumination and some inspiration to some of our younger activists on how we can take better leadership positions by confronting leadership. Lynn, what do you think out of this task force? What do you hope that our young activists today and our activists, young, less young as well, all of our activists should be still taking out of this report 25 years later?
Larry, I back up just a little bit because of your mention of environmental racism, which I'm quite passionate about. And I was surprised when you made that observation, and it was dead on. So thank you so much. Just to give you an idea of when we were doing this task force report, that environmental racism was a new terminology. And it didn't even initially get included in the report. We actually had to fight to get that section put in the report, as Hassan will well remember.
And it came about as a result of Nova Scotia. There was a particular experience that actually shaped the discussion on that issue.
Exactly. So we had to fight. And it's interesting, 25 years later, and again, this will be thrown back to Hassan too, which is the bill around environmental justice and racism presently before Parliament, is imagine 25 years later, there was a need to not include the word racism and only justice, because we didn't get the idea that environmental justice and environmental racism, although they go hand in hand, are not the same thing. So we actually, even in that bill, I would say we had to water it down a bit in order to get something passed, because they weren't prepared. Some parties weren't prepared to just deal with the issue of racism. So we're still fighting that battle. So Larry, thank you for raising that. If you ask me from the learnings from the task force report, one of the things I well remember, and I believed this, maybe I was young and naive, I really believed that as we did that, I promised those workers that this report would not sit on the shelves. I really believed it. Like we were doing hardcore, getting blood, sweat, and tears. And then I find myself throughout those 25 years, even once I retired, to say, do you know about the task force report? Are you familiar? And I find out it's out of print. People didn't know about it. People weren't using it. All that work, when in actual fact, many cases within our unions was sitting on the shelves, which we promised the workers that it would be a living document. So here I had spoke to Larry earlier to say, you'll tell them how we ended up having this panel today, I'm sure, because it's like bringing it off that shelf and 25 years later putting it out there. And that's why I was so excited, because we're not going to let it die. We're not going to let it rest. And I hope that that's a learning for us, that why do we have to keep going back and reinventing the wheel when we have much of the prescription already before us to be done. We cannot do this work without youth 25 years later and understand what they bring to the table. My biggest message to youth today would be to remind them that some of this work is already done. They don't have to start again, but the report itself recognized that we on our issues, our concerns, don't have the research. We don't have the research. We don't have it written. It's not available to people. So we're forcing people and our youth to do these things all over again. And at some time or the other, the youth have to get together with the elders, like we do traditionally in our community, recognize the importance of the elders in guiding them through what has occurred. It doesn't mean that the elders tell them what to do or you have to do it their way now. It's like we're building this whole movement together. And we have a thing in the reparations movement, nobody left behind. So we don't want anybody left behind. We want everybody at that table. One of the things that Brother Hassan mentioned there, and I used a little bit of different words, but we saying exactly the same thing, was the no change without struggle. There's no change that's going to take place without struggle. And I too would throw out a caution, because we have access to things we didn't have in our day, like the media. I mean, every time you turn on the TV now, I mean, I keep a scrapbook collection over 50 years. So I can tell you what was in the media 50 years ago and what is today. And there was very few of our issues or concerns that were in the media even 25 years ago compared to where they are today. But does that media visibility create a movement? Does that media highlighting, does it change what we're trying to change for these equity group people? And I would say, no, not necessarily, because again, I go back to there's no change without a struggle. So there's still that struggling and whether it be in solidarity or whether it be challenging those systems, is that we're not going to change just by doing that. Part of that is this whole, I'm constantly still being wrapped about political correctness. That somehow or the other, that there's this importance of being appearing to be good and going along with that, being correct, politically correct, without challenging those very system. The last thing on the youth, I would say that we haven't done for workers of color, period. For example, I was asked to do an engagement for a big organization And the organization said they were interested in issues for people of color. They wanted to change. Would I come in and share my insights and what have you? And I said, as part of that, is there, like, you know, how are you compensating? What is the compensating? Oh, there's no compensation. You know, this is what you do, isn't it? This is what we're going to do something. Like, you know, we're going to change. So why would that take place? So even with our youth, we think that what they bring to the table comes without any type of compensation as a part of it. We don't value their expertise in youthness and what they're bringing to the table, and we've got to change how we do that. I'll stop there because I think that one last thing is we don't acknowledge what these workers of color, their family needs today. We're leaving the family out of the picture in a lot of the cases, what they're dealing with their families at home. What are their needs? And how are you going to retain them? I had somebody who told me there was an elder in their community who had passed away and who was very important. It was in an Indigenous community, and they were older, quite old, I don't know, 90s, 100s, whatever. And in the workplace couldn't understand why they would take time off to acknowledge that morning. And the person was prepared to quit their job because in their community, it's really important to acknowledge and what has happened with the passing of this elder. But you don't see reports about the youth in terms of, because they have more of these different family needs. There's more people dying that are around them and what have you, but yet there's no report on, in terms of retaining youth, how do we need to support them and their families. So I'll stop there. There's certainly a multitude of things.
Larry, I might have to go.
ahead.
I apologize. And I just wanted to, first of all, let me thank all my good colleagues, panelists, and Natalie. Thank you for sharing your passion, sister. It's truly a wealth of energy that I haven't seen in a long time. So thank you again. Gail, it's wonderful to see you as always. Glad to see you're doing great work and enjoying life a bit. I saw your knitting there in the background, so keep you calm. Gloria, it's good to see you, sister. I've never met, I mean, we've met in the past, but again, I want to wish you all the best in the hard work you're doing. And Ainsworth, thank you for your leadership, my friend. I know as you're there, and sometimes you take a little bit of the ribbing from activists about you're not doing enough, but thank you for everything. And I want to say to Larry, thank you again. I know, you're getting ready for the holidays for all of you. I wish you all the best with your family. And to conclude, Lynn, and you touched a bit on the environment, racism, and just to put it in just one small context, at the time when we were doing this, how thinking about ahead, the Grassy Narrows people in Ontario had to deal with mercury poisoning that nobody wanted to acknowledge despite decades of struggle. And finally, you got to acknowledge, if that's not environmental racism, then what is? By the way, they didn't have to dump the mercury in their community, but they did. And yet, for decades, government denied that happened and didn't take any responsibility. Though we're never going to restore the life that's been ruined as a result of that. But the reality is, we need to name it for what it is. And without name it for what it is, you can't fight it and you can't change it. And I think for those who would like us to, let's pretend it's something else. No, let's tell you what it is, because it happened far more often in workers of color and First Nation community than any other community at the end of the day. And unless we acknowledge that and remind ourselves that these things about how we describe them are critical about the honesty about our struggle, because if we can't, we're never going to make progress. I know, listen, there's much more for us to do. I think the 25 years of reflecting on this struggle, it doesn't change. So I'll tell you one little nice story and then I'll go. In the Senate a week ago, we were having a discussion in my group about something that somebody wanted to make a motion to kick people out who violate certain other ethical rules in the Senate. And it was fine. I mean, nothing wrong with the motion. The timeliness of it, I can argue about whatever. But I wanted to talk about something that nobody wanted to talk about, and that was there were some individuals in the Senate who were outright racist. They weren't there during my time, because if I did, it was going to be a whole other place. But the reality is, I said, when are we going to also pass a motion to expel racists in the chamber? Because for what happened in that chamber was unacceptable. It should never have happened. And by the way, people should be equally as passionate and committed. Now, I let loose my hair a little bit and make sure people understood. But I think for one thing for certain, you got to know that there will never be any change in that chamber, again, unless somebody's pushing the envelope to say this will not be tolerated. And if you can kick people out for other ethical breaches in the chamber, you can also kick them for racial ethical breaches in the chamber, equally so, and take away their title at the end of the day. So listen, I want to wish you all the best and happy holidays. Keep up the struggles. And thank you so much for Larry for inviting me to participate. I wish you guys all the best and thank all the activists who are participating on the struggle here today. Okay, all the best, my friends. Take care.
Thank you, Hassan, and keep up the fight.
Okay, all the best, my friend. Okay. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. So that was very interesting because Hassan mentioned something in some of his previous remarks. The one word I took out of that was fight, the word fight. And the one word that I took out of what you were just talking about, Lynn, was the word struggle. So what I think that what we can say is that the 25 years that we look back upon, those are the two words that come to mind, is that it has been a fight and it has been a struggle. And I think is going to continue to be a fight and a struggle, especially when we have the senator telling us that, and I'm glad that he brought this up, that because this is where it is. I mean, if you have to bring a motion or make a suggestion that we bring a motion to address the racism that exists in the Senate of Canada, well, then it doesn't get any bigger than that, does it? I mean, you know, this is the constitutional body that, you know, can only get rid of itself, okay? You can't even have a democratic vote to get rid of them. So this is where the colonialist oppression is at the most advanced. This is where it is, folks. So I'm very glad that Hassan shared that story with us. So I think that, so let's broaden it out now. I think that, you know, the task force, everyone, you know, it did bring the input and the perspectives from the communities that were addressed here: Indigenous, Black, racialized workers and voices. But also, you know, the anti-racist activists, the relationship between labor and community groups and organizations is vital. A lot of you have touched upon it within your various interventions so far. Okay, and Hassan touched on it as well, that it is vital in building a stronger labor movement. Today, workers don't simply exist in the workplace; they also exist in our communities. So, how can unions better promote and support coalition building and those partnerships with community in order to address racism? You know, my typed notes say eradicate racism. You know, I would like to be so idealistic as to say that we will eradicate racism. Something tells me that we will never be able to eradicate it, but we will be able to control it in more and more as we educate people, but especially as we build those coalitions, you know, build out to bring people in. So I'm going to start with Gail, and then I'm going to go to Ainsworth, and then Natalie and Gloria. So, so Gail, you know, you yourself now are working in the community in Victoria. So you're bringing your labor perspective, you know, because you've spent so much time with the labor movement. So tell us, how do you tie those two things together, and at the same time make people understand that what Hassan was saying, unions are the best place to start the fight and to have that fight for social justice. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thanks. Yes. Well, I feel really strongly that is the case. Importantly, first to present and represent labor and union rights and social justice within community. I think what's brought is commitment from unions and resources and the structure that we have had, sharing some of those resources. I'd say that approaching community members by outreach, finding ways to build coalition, to co-sponsor an event or a campaign, or send union leadership and representatives to visibly work alongside, be part of an event, not just working alongside. Getting to know those community members, extremely important. I'd say to consider the cycle of events and the calendar of things that are going on within community as those kinds of opportunities. If elections are coming up, there's that chance to work alongside with candidates, or to consider what negotiations are coming about within community for things that are community issues. That's important. A sort of a change in the way of looking at approaches that often you'll hear those kinds of statements of will be inclusive regardless of a person's race, ethnicity, and so on. I'd say that the approach from unions to say is that we're going to do that in full regard and inclusion of all of those aspects of who we are, rather than that we'll make an exception or we'll do that regardless of, so that we're really taking on and celebrating. I just want to add that within the structures and the business of unions, that we have a full integration of community as represented by diverse members and those who are unrepresented or underrepresented, that we'd be able to build coalition by including those issues when we're organizing, when we're bargaining, when we're negotiating, and then when we're doing some outreach for those kinds of things that are current issues or ongoing issues. Certainly health and safety, food security, and those matters were things that were important to engage and ask community members about. So finding that, Hassan, just quickly as I finish off, Hassan had said or thought maybe that I was knitting. I wasn't, I don't know, maybe fiddling a bit, but I will say that taking the threads of and weaving in those aspects of community with the work and the values and the objectives of the labor movement is extremely important, because they will see and identify themselves within the work of the labor movement. So that's how I'd knit. Thanks.
What a wonderful word if one word had to describe, knitting is a very good word. Ainsworth, how do you feel about community relations?
Larry, it's absolutely vital. These two organizations work in tandem to move a lot of work, and in a sense builds on the continuance of a lot of the issues that are typically established, or a lot of the fights that are typically established in the workplace. What I would say, however, is that we need to be bolder and less reactive. we must move beyond these stable events we engage in on a yearly basis, or rather even had to add other campaigns and initiatives, some of the yearly strategic plans, so we can actually dig deep and beyond the surface of many of the issues that Black, Indigenous, and racialized workers face. Community challenges such as housing, the legal system, social services, and healthcare. These are huge issues that we can come together as a laboring community and actually put together a strategic plan. But typically the agenda is more of a financial support to support coalition building. But I think we need more than that. I think more than the financial contribution, I think unions need to hold community groups more accountable, and they themselves need to hold themselves more accountable. Send it a blank check because you can afford to do so. And it's what has been done, or rather, it's what's been done over the last several years. I think we need to be more engaged as unions, get involved in the planning process, participate in the community groups initiatives, and put forth expectations. Let's also get involved as union and pound the ground. So call the community groups to task. What are you doing? What are some of those expectations? Do a little bit of governance, not just a process, not just hand it out a check because we're unions and we probably can afford it. We need to engage more, be more strategic, be more intentional. Larry.
Well, thank you, Ainsworth. That Gloria, do you agree? And especially when you're looking at your own communities that you're working with, what are your thoughts?
So I do agree with Ainsworth. A lot of the things he said, I think we actually need to build the relationships in the communities. We got to get to know the communities and their issues so that we can stand with them. In moving the issues of support for them. I think we need to really get out there, boots on the ground, face to face is what we need. We need to, and we can use some issues again of what's important to all of us. You supporting me, I'm supporting you, and let's celebrate each other instead of pitting each other against each other. Let's get together and start to celebrate each other. But yeah, I very much agree with many of the things Ainsworth said. Thanks.
Boots on the ground. What do you think? What do you think about that, Natalie?
I'm in complete agreement with what has been said. As trade unionists, Larry, I think that one of the skills that we need to develop and that we continue working on is listening. Workers of color, BIPOC workers know what's best for them, know what has worked and what hasn't. So I think that just like Ainsworth and Gloria were mentioning, listening, learning, it's key into achieving into having a successful fight against racism. I also like the topic of trade. We are trade unionists, right? So what is a better way than going into communities, like Gloria said, exchanging some of our advocacy efforts by providing Know Your Rights sessions to different communities and tailoring to what they need. And in exchange of that, learning from them what are the challenges that they face in their family lives, in their community lives, and at work. So that will better equip both of us with information and tools and power to better tackle the issues, not only in collective bargaining, but in the labor market, at work, and our communities. So yes, I totally echoed what has been said. Thank
Great.
you.
So I'm mindful of the time at this point because we're going to finish in just a few minutes. So I'd like each of you to kind of just simply come to give me a minute on what your thoughts would be, your parting thoughts in this session to all those who have graciously joined us. and kindly joined us. And then I'll wrap it up at the end. I just want to have your thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Lynn. You kind of ended, you said, okay, I'm going to leave it at that, but I'm sure that you have some parting thoughts for us. And then after that, I'll go to Gail, and then to Gloria, and then Ainsworth, and then Natalie. So go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, Brother Larry, my parting thoughts are so simple that we've heard them a million times before. And it's basically organize, and do more organizing. And as part of that organizing, challenge those systems. And also, one of the biggest barriers 25 years ago, which I think you're probably still having today, is being able to utilize the resources that are already available within the trade union movement for our groups. We need to use those resources and support and those that do come forward to challenge and organize. I'm thinking in my own union of the PSAC, that class action suit I mean, it's just phenomenal, but it needs support, and they need to organize, and we need to be part of the challenge. So it's simple, but yet we sometimes lose sight of it.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Gail, what would your parting thoughts be?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and to all of those who are participating and listening in. Well, I'd say, this is a call and a challenge for us to work in solidarity, to out racism and make change. Working in solidarity is where we find our strength. There were a couple of references. I think this is Natalie most recently talking about the importance of listening, and Gloria before that, and others, all of you, as the consultations went on. And it's hard to do that listening, but it harkens for me to a Chinese character, the calligraphy for the verb to listen. And if we can approach that work with zeal and with courage, but also when you deconstruct the calligraphy, it is with eyes, with ears, with undivided attention, and with heart. So with that, I share, and I hope that we'll be able to build and mobilize and take this on for the next 25 years and beyond. Thanks.
That's really quite lovely, Gail. Thank you so much. Ainsworth, what are your final thoughts as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I was just jotting some notes down. I think leaders need to be a little bit more edgy. I think as unions, activists, and leaders, I think we're a little bit too complacent. We need to infuse a bit of urgency. We see what has been going on over the last little while. I mean, perfect example, the Doug Ford government. We know what's going on with the Doug Ford government, the Alberta government, and of course the Quebec government. We need to do a lot more. All of this in the last little while is all those three leaders that I identified. It's all there's a common theme, and that's racism. And so we know our biggest weapon at our disposal is politics. And what we need to do as leaders, as unions, is to ensure that we engage our membership in politics, reunite or come together, same as we did for Bill 28. All the unions across Canada came together. That was such an awesome moment, and we need to do a little bit more of that. Move away from that complacency and infuse some urgency, because politics is significant. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Ainsworth, and Natalie. Finally, to you, what are your parting thoughts?
My parting thoughts is the importance of questions. Ask questions at all times. Question the status quo. Questions what's going on. But most importantly, us as workers advocates, we need to question ourselves and what are we doing? And if we are doing everything we can to provide space to BIPOC workers and to ensure that that justice is made at every space where they are. Is it community? Is it workplaces? Is it school? Is it a city, a country? And yeah, those are my questions, and let's keep fighting, because the crisis continues, and workers need support.
Thank you so much, Natalie. So to Lynn and to Hassan and Gloria and Gail and Ainsworth and Natalie, I just want to say a very big thank you for having shared with us this time and this space, and it was recorded, which means you can tell all your friends that they can come to the CLC Facebook page and they can watch you, and they can watch us, and they can listen to the fact that we have taken this report. And I would like to salute the leadership of the Workers of Color Working Group, Ainsworth and Danielle Dubuc, who certainly would be with us. My thoughts are with Danielle right now. She was in hospital lately, and we're certainly thinking about her. And just a great big thank you to the both of you, Ainsworth and Danielle, for the leadership that you've shown to say, hey, you know, we've had this report. We need an anti-racism action plan from the CLC, but it's all there. So we need to simply bring it back out, put it back out there, and it is up to all of us, because of you know, that we cannot sit on our laurels, we cannot stand back. The struggle and the fight continue, that we have to be out there. If the unions, if the locals don't want to hear the report, if they don't want to see the report, we have to keep pushing it out there. We have to keep saying, listen, it's all there. We have to do the work. And the thing about the union movement is, we all know, is that we can have the difficult conversations, because we will make those spaces available, and we will call them space. Those spaces will be safe spaces for us to have the difficult conversations. We know how to do this, folks. We know how to do it. We just have to do it. So thank you again so much for joining us, for sharing your knowledge and your learning. And Lynn and Hassan, what can I say? You know, you are our elders, and whether Hassan is in the Senate or whether you are in Truro, in the community, you are fantastic leaders that have inspired so many. We stand on your shoulders. And if you did not do the work that you did 25 years ago and challenge the leadership of the CLC back then the leadership of the CLC today probably would not be as enthusiastic to take it up and say, you know, when Bea and Siobhan and Lily, they were absolutely unanimous, immediate in saying, yes, we must do this. This report has to come out, has to come out again and again and again. And so unless we challenge leadership, we will not get what we want. So let's continue to challenge leadership. Let's continue to challenge the structures. Let's continue to challenge the system. Let's fight and be strong and united in the struggle. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much.